Live from South Africa.
Assalamu alaikum. You are listening to the Mara Mukwata show on Salam Media. All right, so today's question, I'd like to know from you, what are your thoughts on private schools requesting funding from the government? If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section, or you can send them to us on WhatsApp. The number is 061-766-0355. I'm joined on the line by Ibrahim Ansur, who is the Secretary General for the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association. They have appealed to the government for financial relief for as a private institution. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran for joining me, Brother Ibrahim.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakallah for inviting me.
Alhamdulillah, shukran. So tell us, when did the National Alliance start, and what was the aim behind it?
Well, the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association is almost 20 plus years old, and it is an umbrella organization that represents about 1,400 plus schools in the country. And the membership of the Alliance comprises associations which are faith-based, for example, the Association of Muslim Schools, the Catholic Board of Education, the South African Board of Jewish Education, ISASA, which is the largest organization in ISA, the Waldorf Federation, the Montessori, the Anglican. So we are a very broad-based organization representing the independent school sector. And we have been recognized by the government, by the Department of Basic Education and the Minister as the official voice of the independent school sector in the country.
All right. Now, how has the lockdown impacted private schools, both academically and financially?
Well, obviously, like every other sector in the country, the COVID pandemic has affected independent schools as well. There has been obviously a ripple effect because our schools depend very heavily on fees for their survival. And I think perhaps most of your listeners by now would have heard that the independent school sector is a very broad sector. It has in its stable, it has the affluent schools, which are a small percentage really when one compares the total number of independent schools that we have. But a very large number of schools serve disadvantaged communities. They have been established by faith-based organizations who were concerned about protecting their own cultural and religious heritage, because when the South African Schools Act was promulgated in 1996, it made provision for state schools and independent schools. Now, state schools are a-religious. They do not teach religion at all because we are a secular state. And faith-based institutions and organizations and communities were of the view that children required a grounding in their specific faith, in their specific culture, and their specific way of life. And hence, these faith-based schools, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, etc., were then established. But they were established by community organizations, and they were funded largely by the community. And the fees that they charge were more or less sufficient to run the institution. So when COVID came along, and we had a large number of parents who either lost their jobs or whose businesses had to close down and who were perhaps retrenched, and as a result of which a significant percentage of parents couldn't afford to pay fees, which meant that the schools found themselves in the last 4 or 5 months in a very difficult financial position. So when we engaged with government at the beginning of this pandemic, as early as April, we did in fact ask government for assistance from perhaps the Solidarity Fund. And we made a formal proposal to government at that time, but unfortunately, they were not in a position to assist us. Now, since then, the situation has become more difficult because it's a protracted period. It's almost 4 months now that our schools have been operating, and the fee collections have been between 20% and 50%. So it has been very difficult, which is why the plea is being made now to the government to try to assist the independent school sector, because we serve a very useful purpose in providing education to the children of our country.
So how many schools are in need of funding at the moment?
You see, of our total number of 1,400, conservatively, I would say at least half of them would be in need. So of the 1,400, there would be a minimum of 700 schools across the country which will be in need. I must tell you that these schools are located in townships, in rural areas, and in very poor, poverty-stricken areas. And some of the schools don't charge fees at all. So fortunately, the communities have been supporting them. So it's a significant number of schools, I would say. As I said, I would say a minimum of 700 schools. And just to give you a background, how have schools been managing so far? 90% of a school's budget goes on teachers' salaries. So, and virtually 90% of the income is from school fees. So if only half or less than half of the fees are collected, which means the teachers' salaries can't get paid. So what schools have been doing, unfortunately, is reducing teachers' salaries by up to 40 to 50%. And so basically the teachers are subsidizing the parents and keeping the school going. So this is a complication, and obviously it can't go on forever. And this is why we are hoping that we would get some kind of relief, a special relief fund from either the government or from any other organization. I know the government has received funds from the IMF. Perhaps we're looking at whether some of that money can't be used for independent schools as well.
All right. And what are your concerns should you not get the funding that you require?
Well, the reality is that already some schools have had to close down because a school that is not operating for the last 3 or 4 months, which doesn't have an income, obviously cannot continue to function. They can't pay their teachers. So some schools have closed down. Others have had to retrench staff and make do with the basic staff and then double up the work. And I must tell you that, the irony is that you have schools, state schools, which are staffed by teachers employed by the state. Many teachers are not even going to work because of comorbidities and whatever other reason, and they're getting paid. Teachers, independent schools are working doubly hard because in addition to the children that are coming to school, they're also offering online lessons, which means they've got to prepare for the online lessons. So the teachers are working actually double the normal number of hours that they normally work. So, and then that's the irony, unfortunately, that they're working doubly hard and they're earning half the salary. So the question that you ask, what are the implications? Schools will close, teachers will lose their jobs. The children in the independent schools will have to be placed by law in state schools, which means the state schools become overcrowded and the burden of the additional cost of those children falls onto the state. So in a sense, the independent school sector, and this is well known, subsidizes the state with regard to provision of education for children, which is why we don't think it's unfair for us to make this appeal to tide our schools over in this time of crisis.
And this is a crisis that has affected all of us. It does not choose a race, it does not choose a social standing. Everyone is affected by this crisis, and it is a global pandemic. Has there been other ways of getting funds besides from the government?
Well, I must tell you that our schools, I'm talking now, since we are speaking to a Muslim radio station,
Hmm.
you must understand that the Association of Muslim Schools, in particular, that I can speak for because I'm also an executive member of the association, relies very heavily on donors from the community.
Hmm.
And many schools have been fortunate that people have come forward with zakat funds to assist these schools, and they have been doing this for some time. So the zakat funds are used to assist those children who are zakatable.
Hmm.
So, in a sense, our communities have had to dig deeper into their pockets to support these schools. So that's one source of funding. But you must remember that many of the businesses themselves have been affected. So where
Hmm.
previously they could have actually assisted, they are no longer in a position to do so in the short term because their businesses have also been affected. So where do we get funds from? If it's not from the state, then it's from well wishers, it's from big business, and perhaps organizations outside the country, that are benevolent and want to assist the poorer communities in our country.
All right. Okay. And lastly, what is your appeal to the government?
Well, we are in the process of writing again to the government. We've prepared a memorandum which we are going to submit together with all the facts and figures. And we are hoping that just as they bailed out the taxi industry with R1 billion, we too feel that we are in need of assistance. And we're hoping that this time around they will heed our pleas.
All right. Inshallah. May Allah make it possible as well. Shukran so much for your
Ameen.
time, and have a lovely day. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah so much.
Ibrahim Ansur, the Secretary General of the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association, NAISA. They have requested for funding from the government to assist with their independent schools. And I did ask you, what are your thoughts on private schools requesting funding from the government? And just to share a few comments, Fatima Kazembe says, why not, especially in the current economic state? If the government does not come to their aid, who will? Aziza Hadhrani says, definitely to help those parents struggling to pay fees too. All South Africans have been affected. Helping them will help those employed at the school. And as you've heard by Brother Ibrahim, the schools, the teachers have been taking pay cuts, up to 40% of their pay cuts. Meanwhile, the state school teachers still get their pay. And if the government cannot come to their aid as they did the taxi industry, then who will help them? Somebody needs to help them. So we're starting with the government. If you have any further comments, please leave them in the comment section below, or you can send them to us on WhatsApp. The number is 061-766-0355. We'd like to know from you, what are your thoughts on private schools receiving funding from the government? You are listening to the Maria Mukanda Show on Salam Media. We will be right back.